Hey, so this is the 11-inch iPad Air running an M3 chip. It has 8 gigs of RAM and it's basically a faster iPad Air than last year. So who's this iPad for? Now, for all the people who thinks the iPad Air isn't worth it, you may want to watch the video because I don't think it's a bad iPad at all. I actually think it's quite good when I tested it for weeks on out. It's just kind of hard to recommend it over other iPads, especially used iPads in the market. But in case you are looking for a brand new iPad, I think this is the one that you should look into instead of going for an iPad Pro. Now, if you're buying an iPad for your kids or your younger siblings, you may want to look into the new iPad 11 with the A16 chip. And I think for its price, it's one of the best tablets in the market for under $350. Alright, so just to give you guys a refresher on the iPad Air real quick, the M3 iPad Air that I'm reviewing is the 11-inch version, but it also comes in a bigger 13-inch version. But I think the 11-inch iPad Air is the perfect size iPad for just about everyone. And this one has 512 gigs of storage with 8 gigs of RAM, perfect for Apple Intelligence if you actually use it. Now, the M3 chip inside here features an 8-core CPU as well as a 9-core GPU, which is actually the same amount of cores as the outgoing M2 iPad Air. But this one actually supports hardware accelerated ray tracing, perfect for, 3D rendering softwares or games that supports ray tracing. But you're probably not going to do that on the iPad. It's nice to have for sure, but you'll most likely want to use an actual computer for 3D rendering. Now, this is actually the first iPad running an M3 chip, and I'm surprised that there's actually one less GPU core here than the iPad Pro with M4. But to give you guys some clarity on what this means though, I went ahead and compared the outgoing iPad Air with M2 and compared it with this iPad Air with M3, but I'll also show you guys what the M4 iPad Pro got. So what I did was run a Geekbench 6 test on its GPU with Metal first, as well as run a CPU benchmark so we can figure out what the differences are. And here's what we're looking at in terms of scores. As you guys can see, there's about an 8% difference here between the outgoing M2 iPad Air with this new M3 iPad Air when it comes to GPU. And we're seeing about 18% difference from iPad Air with M3 to the iPad Pro with M4. Now, will you notice those differences in everyday tasks? Most likely not, at least I didn't when I was using Lightroom to edit photos or playing games like Wuthering Waves or Genshin Impact on these iPads. CPU differences is about the same here as well, about 10 to 13% difference in terms of M2 versus M3, and about a 20% difference between M3 Air and M4 iPad Pro. Now, in terms of its design, it looks just like last year's M2 iPad Air. From the colors, to the build quality, to the display, the FaceTime camera, it's a one-to-one copy compared to last year's iPad Air. Nothing has changed here, so if you like the slight redesign from last year, you'll like this one too. Now, this is probably going to be the last iPad Air with a 60Hz display, since rumors are indicating that non-Pro iPhones this year will finally have 120Hz refresh rate. So I'm hoping we'll see that same thing here on the iPad line next year, and that we'll finally get 120Hz on non-Pro iPads. Now, one thing I do wish the iPad Air has though is Face ID. Now, having Face ID on the iPhone and the Pro iPads is a game changer. And as much as I love Touch ID on my MacBook Pro, it's just a bit weird having to reach for the lock button on the iPad and scanning my fingerprint when it's on the Magic Keyboard. It just feels a little bit outdated and very slow compared to Face ID on the iPad Pro. Now, in terms of accessories, the Apple Pencil Pro still works here flawlessly on the M3 iPad Air. We saw this with the new iPad Pro with M4, and it still works here on the M3 iPad Air. But what is new though for this M3 iPad Air is this Magic Keyboard, which now looks just like the M4 iPad Pro's Magic Keyboard with the quick function buttons above the number row. You'll also get a slightly bigger trackpad, but there's no aluminum finish on the actual keyboard area. It's the same soft touch fabric that you get on the outside of the keyboard, and it kind of carries over to the keyboard area as well as the trackpad. Besides that though, I also noticed that the Magic Keyboard on the iPad Air doesn't go back as much as the one on the iPad Pro. Now, I'm not sure if you guys could see the differences here in the video, but yeah, I noticed it immediately. Now, jumping right back into performance, software, and day-to-day usage though, the iPad Air honestly felt just like the iPad Pro with M4, but with a 60Hz panel. Now, sure, it didn't feel as smooth without that ProMotion display, but everything still performed like the iPad Pro that I know. iPad OS is pretty much the same in every iPad, with some minor features missing on the non-M series iPads. But here on the iPad Air, it's just like you're using the Pro iPad without that fast refresh rate display. When it comes to the apps, to the experience of using an iPad, it's pretty much the same across the board. Now, when it comes to gaming though, I've been playing a ton of Wuthering Waves. It's kind of like Genshin Impact, but with a bit less fairy tale-y story and more futuristic. And the iPad Air with M3 is able to play this game at high settings, at a constant 60 frames per second, without any noticeable stutters or lag. So whether you're gonna use this for gaming or be your iPad to get work done, this will be able to handle those tasks just fine. Now, the best part about using an M series iPad is that you can connect this to a 4K or 6K monitor and use this as a computer in a way. So when it's connected to a monitor, I can have multiple apps up on the monitor and multitask, and I can also have Lightroom or some other app on the iPad screen and edit while something's up on the big screen. Now, as someone who's primarily using a Mac or Windows machine, there are limitations on how many apps you can have up on the screen, and you can only have one video playing. But besides that though, it's really cool to have non-Pro iPads get this extended screen feature versus just mirroring the display like on non-M series iPads. Now, as far as battery life goes, technically this 11-inch iPad Air can last up to 10 hours on a single charge, but from my experience, I'm only able to get about 6.5 to 7 hours on a daily basis, whether I'm gaming or watching videos on YouTube or Netflix. I think that's still pretty good in my opinion, even though it's not the claimed 10 hours of battery that's promised. But in all honesty, it's good enough to last a single workday. Plus, if I have this plugged into my monitor via USB-C, my iPad is always plugged in, charging through the monitor, so I don't even have to worry about battery life. But yeah, that's pretty much it with the M3 iPad Air. It's the same as last year's iPad Air, but with just a slightly faster processor. So if you didn't end up upgrading last year, you'll get a much better iPad this year. I think if you're looking for an iPad that can handle intensive tasks, that's great for gaming, or something that you can use for office work and you don't want to compromise on its performance, I think the iPad Air is honestly a great pickup. It's an awesome tablet, but you can also be connected to a Magic Keyboard, you can also get an Apple Pencil Pro, and you can connect it to a big screen monitor that can sort of act as a laptop replacement. Now, if you can get over the 60 Hz refresh rate, which I think a lot of normal everyday users don't really care about, the iPad Air with M3 is an awesome pickup for around $550 on Amazon. I don't think there's another tablet out there at this price point that can compete with the iPad Air when it comes to performance. Now, sure, you can pick up a used iPad Pro from a couple of years ago for about the same price, used or refurbished, and that'll have that 120 Hz refresh rate that I was talking about, but you'll also get a slightly slower processor with that. Now, if you don't want to go through all the hassle of making sure that the battery health is at 100%, the iPad Pro is in tip-top condition, just go for something brand new and get the iPad Air.